In this video, we are going to discuss the worksheet on homeostasis and excretion. You can get this worksheet on our website. Number 1. The diagram shows structures in a human which form and store urine. Liquids pass through tubes X, Y, and Z in the direction shown by the arrows. Which statement about the volume of liquid passing through Y in one day is correct? So, in the diagram, X is the renal artery and Y is the renal vein. We can understand this by the direction of liquid flow or the direction of blood flow, and Z is the ureter because it's connected to the bladder. So blood flows through X to the kidney where ultrafiltration takes place, and water and urea is filtered by the kidney, and it passes through the ureter to the bladder. And Y is a renal vein through which the filtered blood passes to the rest of the body. So the question is, which statement about the volume of liquid passing through Y in one day is correct? So X should have the highest volume of liquid, Y should have the second lowest, Y should have the second highest, and Z should have the lowest one, because Z is the filtrate of blood. It's not the blood. In option A, it is greater than that passing through X. So Y should not have a greater volume of liquid than X because X has the greatest volume of liquid which gets filtered by the kidney and the volume decreases because some of the water is filtered out. So X should have the highest volume. Y is not The volume of Y is not greater than that passing through X. So option A is wrong. It is less than passing through Z. Y has the second highest volume of liquid because it's the filtered blood, and Z is the filtrate. It has the least volume. So Z so Y does not have less than passing through Z. The volume of liquid passing through Y, it's definitely higher than Z because Z is the filtrate. In option C, it is much less than that passing through X but slightly greater than passing through Y. The volume of liquid in blood vessel Y is slightly less than X because a very slight volume of liquid is filtered out. So it's not much less through X. It is slightly less than passing through X because a slight volume of liquid is filtered by the kidney. So the answer is D. A very small volume of liquid is filtered by the kidney and the volume of blood decreases a little bit and that volume passes through Y and a very little amount of filtrate passes through Z. So the volume of liquid passing through Y is slightly less than the liquid passing through X and is much greater than the volume of liquid that passes through Z. Question 2. The diagram shows the homeostatic control of body temperature. What are the corrective mechanisms P and Q and coordinator R? So the normal body temperature, the temperature of the body rises above the normal temperature, then there is a coordinator R that signals a corrective mechanism P and Q, and there is a negative feedback that returns the body's temperature back to normal. The question asks the question asks what are the mechanisms P and Q? So when the temperature of the body increases above normal, the sweat glands produce more sweat so that evaporation can take place and the body loses more and more heat. And the arteries near the skin, they dilute. They become wider to allow more flow of blood so that the blood loses more heat by radiation and convection. So P is sweating, it's definitely not shivering, and Q, both of them are more blood flows close to the skin surface, so both are correct. And this mechanism is coordinated by the hypothalamus of the brain. So brain is the control center, brain is the coordinator. The temperature regulatory system, the hypothalamus, detects a temperature change in the blood and initiates this mechanism. So our answer would be A. Question 3. Which response will happen if a person walks into a cold environment? In option A, hair erector muscles cause the body hairs to lay flat on the skin. When a person enters a cold environment, the hair erector muscles contract so that the hair erects and traps air around the body to insulate the person. So A is wrong. More blood flows in the capillaries near the skin surface. This is what happens when the body temperature increases beyond normal. Large body muscles contract and relax rapidly. This is what happens when you enter a cold region. Your body muscles they contract and relax rapidly to produce heat and increase the body's temperature. Sweat glands produce a large amount of sweat. You do not sweat in winter. So the answer is C. Question 4. The diagram shows a kidney and blood vessel associated with it. Which statements are correct? Vessel X contains more urea than vessel Y. X contains more urea than Y. It definitely does, because more urea is in the blood initially and it's filtered by the kidney, and the amount of urea decreases until it reaches Y. So 1 is correct. Vessel Y contains urine. Urine is the liquid part, so vessel Y does not contain urine. It's wrong. This vessel, the ureter, contains urine. Option 3. Vessel X contains more oxygen than vessel Y. It is true. Oxygen in the blood in the renal artery it's used by the cells in the kidney to respire, and the amount of oxygen may decrease when it reaches from X to Y. So 1 and 3 are correct. Our perfect candidate for the answer is B. Question 5. The diagram shows the human kidneys and their associated structures. What is the structured label X? The vessel that connects kidney and the bladder is called ureter. So the answer is C. Question 6. Which organs in humans are involved in maintaining body temperature? The brain is the control center that detects the temperature change in blood. The hypothalamus does it. So brain is involved in the temperature control. Skin is what brings the change. The sweat glands in the skin produce more sweat. The artery in the skin dilates, and the hair erector muscles they also contract and relax based on the temperature. So skin is also involved in the temperature regulation. Our answer is A. Question 7. During dialysis, substances such as glucose, mineral salts, urea, and water move between the patient's blood and dialysis fluid. Which processes are involved in these movements? Active transport. During dialysis, molecules such as glucose and amino acids or urea move from the patient's blood to the dialysis fluid through a partially permeable membrane down the concentration gradient. They move by diffusion, not by active transport. So A and C are wrong. There is a diffusion gradient, there's a concentration gradient between the fluid, and so that's how the urea and other substances move from the blood to the fluid. So diffusion takes place. Yes. Active transport takes place. No. Our answer would be B. Question 8. The diagram shows a dialysis machine. So this is the dialysis machine and that's a person's hand. Which substance could not be present in a sample of dialysis fluid taken from point X? So point X is dialysis fluid. So what thing cannot diffuse out of the blood into the fluid. Glucose molecules can diffuse across the blood because they are small molecules that can diffuse from the blood into the fluid. Salt ions are also small and soluble molecules. They can diffuse across the membrane. Plasma proteins are big molecules. Proteins are large molecules and they cannot diffuse, they cannot cross the partially permeable membrane. And urea molecules are always filtered by the dialysis machine. So our answer would be C. Question 9. Which part of the skin has a major role in insulating the human body? The layer of fat under the skin protects the human body from any temperature change. So it's the fatty tissue that plays a major role in insulating the human body. Blood vessels only carries blood to the cells. Hair follicles, they just form a layer of air surrounding the skin only when needed, and sweat glands only produce sweat when there's a change in temperature. But the layer of fat under the skin always insulates the human body from any temperature change. It's always present. Question 10. The diagram shows the kidneys and their associated structures. Which row identifies P, Q, R, and which row identifies P, Q, R, and S? So P is the bean-shaped structure, which is definitely the kidney. Q is the tube that connects the kidney and the bladder, which is the ureter. R is the bladder that stores urine, and S is the urethra, the tube that leads the urine out of the human body from the bladder. So our answer would be C. Question 11. By which mechanism would the body be able to lose most heat on a hot, dry day if the surrounding air temperature is higher than body temperature? Option A. Blood vessels in the skin becoming narrower. It would lead to less heat releasing by the body. So option A is wrong. Option B. Hair erector muscle relax so hairs lay flat. It's a possible answer. Number C. Shivering by body muscle ceases. And number D, sweat glands becoming more active. If the sweat glands become more active, it will produce more sweat, which will evaporate more, and the body will lose more heat. But hair erector muscle lying flat will cause no change in body temperature, and shivering will also cause no temperature decrease in the body. So D is the answer because as sweat glands produce more sweat, more water will vaporize from the skin surface and more heat will be lost. So our answer would be D. Question 12. What are the short-term effects of adrenaline on the body? Decreased blood sugar concentration, decreased heart rate, increased blood sugar concentration, increased heart rate. So when adrenaline is released in the blood, the glucagon stored in the liver it's converted into glucose. So the concentration of sugar in the blood will increase, and the heart will beat faster to to transport more blood to the brain and the whole body. So the heart rate will increase. So option 3 and 4 are correct, 1 and 2 are wrong. So the answer is D. Question 13. How will the skin of an athlete respond during a long run? So during a long run, the temperature of body increases and the athlete's body will need to lose the heat. So as the width of the blood vessels in the skin surface increases, more blood flows through the skin surface, and as more blood flows, the more heat is lost by conduction and radiation, and convection, and the temperature of the blood decreases. So the width of the blood vessel on the skin surface, it increases. And sweating, the more the athlete sweats, the more heat it loses, so the sweating increases. So option D is the perfect answer. Question 14. What is correct for the formation of urea? Urea is a compound which is produced by the liver by the breakdown of ammonia, which is formed from amino acids. So it's formed from amino acids, not carbohydrate. And it's formed or synthesized by liver. Ammonia is converted into urea, and ammonia was formed from amino acids. So the answer is B.
Question 15. In a kidney dialysis machine, which substance cannot diffuse through the dialysis membrane? 1. Glucose, B. Insulin, C. Sodium, and D. Urea. So glucose is a small molecule and is also soluble and can pass through the dialysis membrane. Insulin is a protein and proteins are large molecules, so they cannot pass through the dialysis membrane. Sodium, it exists as ions which is dissolved in the blood plasma and it can pass through the dialysis membrane. And urea are also small molecules dissolved in the blood plasma and can pass through the dialysis membrane. So insulin is the answer. Question 16. The diagram represents a section through the skin, which shows the functions of the label parts. So Y is the artery near the skin surface, X is a sensory is a receptor, and Z is a sweat gland. So controls heat loss from blood, it's Y. When the temperature of the skin increases, Y dilates to radiate heat out, receives an external stimulus, it's X, which is a receptor, and receptors receives an external stimulus and generates an impulse, releases fluid, which is sweat. So Z is a sweat gland, and it releases sweat. A is the answer. That's question 17. On a hot day, the cheeks of a light-skinned person may appear red in color. What is the cause of this? Arterioles supplying the skin have dilated. On a hot day, the temperature of the body is very high. To lose heat, the arteries near the skin surface, it dilates, which is called vasodilation, to radiate more heat. So they dilate and more blood is passed on the surface of the skin. Capillaries in the skin have moved close to the surface. No, capillaries do not change their position. The person has started to sweat. The sweating has nothing to do with the skin to appear red. Temperature receptors have ceased to function. When temperature receptors function, it does not cause the blood flow to the skin surface. When arterioles dilate, it causes more blood to flow to the skin surface. That's why the skin appears red in color. Question 18. Which structure in the brain registers changes in blood concentration? It's hypothalamus. Hypothalamus detects the change in pH of the blood or the change in temperature of the blood. Medulla, it is responsible for the involuntary actions, and pituitary gland, it secretes hormones. And the function of cerebellum is for voluntary movements. So hypothalamus is the one that detects the change of pH or temperature of blood. Moving on to question number 19, the diagram shows a section through a skin which structures are activated when a person feels cold. So when a person feels cold, the arteries near the skin surface, they constrict. So when the person feels cold, the arteries near the skin surface, they constrict, and it limits the blood flow to the skin surface, and less heat is radiated by radiation or convection. So this one, structure 3, is activated. The hair erector muscle, it contracts so that the hair is pulled up, and a layer of air is trapped around the skin surface to insulate the person. So 2 is also activated. The number 5, or the sweat gland, it's not activated. When the person feels hot or when the body temperature rises, the gland gets activated. Number 4 is just a layer of skin and has no function to control the body's temperature. So it's just 2 and 3. C. Question 20. In which situation would the amount of insulin secreted into a person's blood be highest? During a game of football, having a meal of rice, waking up early in the morning, working outside on a cold day. So during a game of football, the blood glucose will decrease, and insulin, it decreases the glucose level of blood. During a game of football, the blood glucose level decreases because the muscles use up more glucose, so insulin is not released at that time. Having a meal of rice, it may be the answer because when the meal of rice is taken by a person, the person will digest the meal, digest the rice, and glucose will be digested from it, absorbed from it because rice is mainly glucose. So after having a meal of rice, the insulin level in the blood will increase to decrease the extra glucose the person had. Waking up early in the morning the glucose level is normal, so there is no reason to have an increased amount of insulin in the body. And working outside on a cold day will decrease the body's temperature. Working outside on a cold day, during cold day, the body needs to warm it up. So glucose will be used and energy will be produced by respiration. So the amount of glucose will decrease. Insulin is not needed to decrease the amount of glucose level, but having a meal of rice will increase the level of glucose in the body. So the body needs to decrease the level, and insulin will be secreted. Insulin does this by increasing the permeability of cells to glucose. Moving on to question 21, the diagram shows some of the structures seen in a section through a human skin. What is the function of structure X? So structure X is a receptor to cause capillaries to constrict. Hypothalamus does that. To detect changes in temperature might be the answer. To receive impulses from the central nervous system, receptors do not receive impulses. To stimulate sweat glands to release sweat, hypothalamus does that. Question 22, the diagram shows the human urinary system. Which structure is the urethra? So urethra is the tube that connects bladder to the external environment. Urethra carries urine from the bladder out of the body, which is number C. It shows that a tube that connects the bladder to the outer body to the outer part. B is ureter that connects kidney to the bladder, and A is the kidney, and D is the bladder. Question 23, which organ excretes most carbon dioxide from the human body? It's a direct question. It's B, lungs. Kidney excrete urea from the blood. Rectum excretes feces from the digestive system, and skin excretes some urea and has nothing to do with excretion of carbon dioxide. It produces sweat, which contains a slight amount of urea but no carbon dioxide. So lungs is the only option we have left with. Question 24, which structures are all involved in controlling human body temperature? Blood vessels near the skin surface, they do. The cerebellum is the hypothalamus of the brain that controls the regulation of body temperature. Blood vessels near the skin surface, the hypothalamus, the skeletal muscles. The skeletal muscles, they contract and relax to cause shivering and produce heat of the body. Kidneys do not control the body's temperature, so C and D both are wrong. Moving on to question 25, which parts of the skin are involved in control of body temperature? Sweat glands produce sweat when the temperature of the body rises, so that evaporation takes place of the sweat and the temperature cools down. Receptor temperature receptors, they detect the change in temperature, and blood vessels, they contract or dilate when the body temperature rises or decreases. So all of the three have part in controlling body's temperature. 26. Men sometimes develop an enlarged prostate gland, how might this situation affect urination? So prostate gland is situated somewhere between the bladder and the urethra. So when the prostate gland enlarges, it prevents the functioning of urethra. So urethra carries urine out of the body. So when the prostate gland increases in size or enlarges, it prevents the it pushes against the urethra to and prevents the person to urinate. So the option is by blocking the ureter. It cannot block the ureter because prostate gland is present on the urethra, not ureter. By preventing the exit of urine from the bladder, yes, this is the answer. By stopping the bladder from fitting the urine, so urine is filled by the ureter, not the urethra. By stopping urine production in kidneys, it has nothing to do with the production of urine because production in urine of urine takes place at the kidneys. So the answer is B. Question 27. What helps heat retention in human body? Heat retention is the conserving of heat or preserving more heat. Actively sweating, secreting sweat glands. So when sweat glands are active and secretes more sweat, the body loses more heat. Heat is not retained. There is no retention of heat. Dilated blood vessels near the skin surface. It also radiates more heat by convection or radiation. Fat in and under the skin. This is what traps the heat of the blood. Relaxed hair erector muscles. When the hair erector muscles are contracted, it traps a layer of air surrounding the body, which keeps the heat or acts as an insulator to heat. But but in here, the hair erector muscles are relaxed, not contracted, so it does not retain the heat. So C is the answer. Question 28. The diagram shows a simplified dialysis machine. How do the urea concentration in the blood and dialysis fluid change as they pass through the apparatus? Dialysis machines are used when the person's kidney fail. So it should have a same function like kidneys. And kidneys they filter the blood. The kidneys filter out the urea from the blood. So when blood passes through the dialysis machine, the concentration of urea should decrease because kidneys decrease the concentration of urea, and so should the dialysis machine. And as the concentration of urea in the blood decreases, it means the urea it diffuses from the blood into the dialysis fluid. So the concentration of urea in the dialysis fluid should increase, which is B. Question 29. What helps heat retention in the human body? Actively secreting sweat glands. It helps to lose more heat, not retention of the retention of the heat. Dilated blood vessels near the skin surface. It also helps to lose more heat from the body. So no. Fat in and under the skin. It acts as an insulator and traps the heat in the body. Relaxed hair erector muscles. The erector muscles are relaxed, not contracted, because when the erector muscle contracts, the body hair, it rises up and traps heat that surrounds the body. Uh, a layer of air is trapped around the body, which acts as an insulator. But when it's relaxed, the hairs are not erected, they lay flat and no air is trapped, so it does not act as an insulator. So C is the answer. Question 30. During a sunny day, which substance is excreted from the leaf? So during a sunny day, the plant should photosynthesize and release oxygen from the leaf, not carbon dioxide, because carbon dioxide is a byproduct of respiration. Nitrogen is never released from a leaf. Sucrose is a byproduct of photosynthesis, but it's not excreted from the leaf. It's transported and stored in the plant. Oxygen is what is released as a excreted product from the plant. Question 31. Which process is not a result of negative feedback? A decrease in the surrounding temperature leads to a decrease in respiration rate. A decrease in the surrounding temperature leads to a decrease in sweating. This is an example of negative feedback because when the sweating decreases, less heat is lost by evaporation of sweat. A decrease in surrounding temperature leads to a decrease in blood flow through the skin surface. When less blood flows to the skin surface, less heat is radiated or lost by convection. So it is also an example of negative feedback. A decrease in the surrounding temperature leads to shivering. When the person shivers, it produces heat as a byproduct, or it produces heat and the body gets heated up. But in option A, a decrease in surrounding temperature leads to a decrease in respiration rate. It should be increase in respiration rate because when the rate of respiration of the body increases, a decrease in the surrounding temperature leads to a decrease in respiration rate. So when the muscles of the body contract to cause shivering, it takes up more energy. So the rate of respiration should increase, not decrease. And also when the rate of respiration increases, it produces more heat. So A is not an example of negative feedback. Moving on to question 32. What is a function of a part of a urinary system? Ureter carries urine from the bladder. Ureter carries urine to the bladder from the kidneys. B. Ureter carries urine from the kidneys. Yes, it does carry from the kidneys to the bladder. Urethra carries urine to the bladder. It carries urine from the bladder out to the body. Urethra carries urine to the kidneys. No. So it's B. Question 33. Which part of the skin has a major role in insulating the human body? Blood vessels do not insulate. It does it does get dilated, but it does not insulate the body. Fatty tissue, it acts as an insulator, it traps the heat. Hair follicles, they act as an insulator when they are erected. Sweat glands do not act as an insulator. It produces sweat when the body's temperature rises. So, fatty tissue has a major role as an insulator. Question 34. Which row shows the parts of the urinary system that carry out different functions? Makes urine, kidneys make urine, carries urine, urethra and ureter both carries urine. Ureter carries urine from the kidneys to the bladder and urethra carries urine from the bladder outside the body to the outside of the body. Holds urine, bladder holds the urine, removes urine from the body, it's urethra. 35. On a hot day, how does the skin react to lower the internal temperature of the body? The arterioles, they dilate. The vasodilation, it takes place so that the heat is lost by radiation or convection. Sweat production, it should increase because the more the sweat, the more heat is lost by evaporation because the skin loses more heat as the sweat it evaporates from the surface. Hair lie flat against the skin. So when the hair lies flat, it traps no air to act as an insulator. So no air is trapped and the heat is lost more efficient. Moving on to question 36. Where are the most nitrogenous compound excreted from humans? It should be the kidneys because kidneys excrete urea, which is a nitrogenous compound. Liver do not excrete urea, it produces urea. Rectum excretes feces, mainly fibers, not nitrogenous compounds. Fibers are not nitrogenous compounds. And skin do excrete some urea, but not most of the nitrogenous compounds. So it's A. 37. When the temperature of the air is higher than the body temperature, which of these control mechanisms can help to maintain a constant body temperature? Constriction of blood vessels in the skin. Constriction will prevent the blood flow, which means less blood will flow to the skin surface. But we need to decrease the temperature, so more blood should flow. So constriction of the blood vessels will not help to maintain a constant temperature. Shivering will produce more heat. We need to decrease the amount of heat because the temperature is higher, so shivering will not help. Sweating, as the body produces more sweat will be evaporated from the surface, so the temperature will decrease. So it will help to maintain a constant body temperature. So sweating, it should be a yes. Shivering, it would be a no, because shivering will produce heat, not decrease the heat. And constriction of blood vessels in the skin will also conserve the heat, not release the heat. So it's D, because we need to decrease the body temperature because the temperature of the body is higher to maintain a constant body temperature. 38. The diagram represents a kidney machine. Which two substances are both present in the dialysis fluid entering the machine? So dialysis machine are used to excrete the urea or to replace the kidneys. So the dialysis fluid should contain those substances that we need in the blood and should not contain those substances that we do not need in the blood, such as urea. Which two substances are both present in the dialysis fluid entering the machine? In option C and D, urea is present, but urea should be absent in the dialysis fluid so that there is a concentration gradient between the dialysis fluid and the blood so that the urea diffuses out of the blood into the dialysis fluid. So option C and D are wrong. In A, glucose and protein. Proteins are large molecules and they cannot pass through the dialysis membrane, the partially permeable membrane. So giving the dialysis fluid with proteins will not create a concentration gradient. And even if there was a concentration gradient, the proteins wouldn't be able to move because they are too large to pass through this membrane. So it's wrong. Glucose and salts. There should be the concentration of glucose and salt in the blood and the fluid should remain the same because glucose and salts both are useful substances for the body and removing them from the body is not necessary. So this is the answer. The dialysis fluid should contain the same amount of glucose and salt so that they are not removed and should not contain urea so that they are removed from the blood to maintain a concentration gradient. 39. The diagram shows some of the structures in a human skin, which labels describe the structures Y and Z in hot conditions. So in hot conditions, the sweat gland, which is Y, should produce more sweat, which means it should be active, and Z, which is the artery near the skin surface, it should dilate so that more blood passes near the skin surface and heat is lost by radiation or convection. So it should remain dilated, which is B. Question 40. What are the symptoms of diabetes? Diabetes is a disease which causes the pancreas to stop secretion of insulin. Since insulin is not secreted, cells are less permeable towards glucose. This means cells do not take in the excess glucose in the blood and the concentration of glucose in the blood remains high. Since glucose is not removed from the blood, glucose being a highly soluble molecule dissolves in the water and appear in the urine. So the answer is going to be A. Question 41. The diagram shows the kidneys and the associated structures. What are the contents of the label structures? So one is the renal vein because it's connected with vena cava. Two is the renal artery because it's connected with the aorta. And three is the ureter. Ureter is the one that connects the kidneys with the bladder. So one, which is renal vein, should carry deoxygenated blood. Two, which is renal artery, and arteries carried oxygenated blood. Three is ureter that carries urine. It's just A. Moving to question 42. Which process occurs in a dialysis machine? Large protein molecules are removed from the blood plasma. Protein molecules which are large cannot pass through the cell membrane. Materials pass out of the blood down a concentration gradient. It's true. Materials such as urea or excretory products pass from the blood into the dialysis fluid down the concentration gradient. Oxygen is used up in removing materials from the blood. No, because in dialysis machine, the substances or the materials move down the concentration gradient by diffusion, and diffusion does not require any oxygen. Pressure forces dialysis fluid into the blood. It's completely wrong. Dialysis fluid is used to, it acts as an exchange medium and takes out the materials. Dialysis fluid do not move from the dialysis machine into the blood. So it's definitely wrong. B is the only correct answer. Question 43. What happens when the body temperature rises above normal? Arterioles near the skin surface, they should dilate so that more heat is radiated. Sweat glands should produce more sweat, so sweat is also secreted. 44. A person's kidneys remove waste from the blood and keep the composition of the blood constant. Which word describes these functions? Absorption. Absorption is not the answer because the kidneys remove the waste. It does not absorb. Assimilation is the usage of the absorbed materials. Kidneys remove the waste but do not use the waste. Urea is not used in the body, it's just removed. Diffusion is just a movement of particles, not uh, removal of urea. Homeostasis is the maintaining of the constant environment of the body. So when the amount of urea increases in the blood, the kidneys remove the urea to make the composition in the blood constant, which is being described in this statement. Question 45. The diagram shows what happens to the molecules of glucose, protein, and urea as blood passes through a kidney dialysis machine. What are the molecules P, Q, and R? So this is a partially permeable membrane. So this is the boundary where the exchange takes place. We can see these large molecules do not pass this boundary, which means they are large and they cannot pass through these small gaps. Proteins are such molecules that act in this way, which means these large molecules or P will be proteins. The small white dot ones are the ones that move into the dialysis fluid. So these are small molecules and pass through dialysis fluid and they're filtered out of the blood. So urea are those molecules that act in this way because urea is what we need to filter out. And they are small molecules that can pass through the membrane and into the dialysis fluid. So it's because there's a lower concentration of urea in the dialysis fluid, but a high concentration of urea in the blood. So there's a concentration gradient and the urea diffuses out of the blood into the dialysis fluid. Molecules R are the black dot ones. They're the concentration of the molecule R or the black dot ones. It's the same in both the blood and the dialysis fluid, which means it's glucose because glucose are useful substances that does not need to be excreted. So the concentration gradient is zero and no glucose molecules diffuse into the blood or into the tissue fluid or into the dialysis fluid. So proteins they cannot pass through they cannot pass through the membranes. Urea can pass through the membranes and diffuse from the blood into the dialysis fluid. And glucose, the concentration of glucose, it's the same. It's the same in the blood and also in the dialysis fluid and is not removed. So answer is D.